And are we live? I hit the button. And we're live. It is Tuesday, August 23rd, 5:04 p.m. Kashmir Hill is on her way. We are not allowed to have fun anymore until she gets here. But we were discussing, Scott was telling me about his realization about how TikTok, I think you put it really well.
Well, I
did. TikTok writes the joke for you.
Yeah, and you just appear in it.
Yeah.
And you know, if you've been on it for 2 days, which I've been on just for 2 days, I mean, I know we see the same distracted boyfriend meme, but like, at least it's a different like captions each time, whereas the same joke goes around and around. I was amazed when I spent like, you know, 2 train rides going through TikTok. And then when I went back to Twitter, I realized it's like, they don't write the jokes for you. It's like it's just a blank space. And I was amazed on how much text there is. And
yeah, but then also, you know, TikTok is super interesting in that like people don't kind of like do the mundane or the self-promotion, right? Like it's all about the jokes. But like I would say solidly like half of my Twitter is making jokes, and then like half of it is like I wrote an article, and I can be like, okay, so I got promoted to associate professor, or like whatever it is. And so there's kind of this like mix of, but TikTok, I mean, it is mundane. I mean, in the sense that it can be boring and kind of tedious, as you described, but like it's not like here's a video of me eating breakfast. But people will post video or like pictures of what they ate for breakfast on Twitter. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of a very different, like, why do we do that? Like,
yeah, right. Yeah. So I think, right. So, right. What we had for breakfast, that what you post on Twitter, but
Cassie,
you never
we don't care that you were eating cheese, Cassie.
Right.
Like, right? Like, don't tell us. Just TikTok it or get the fuck out, Cassie.
also, I would say, do you remember? Maybe it still exists. PR Newswire, like, so that like if you had a press release, Meta beats projections by 2 cents a share. You know, you send it to, or something about the South China Sea. You'd send, there were ways of disseminating information that were, kind of official-ish. But now Twitter is that kind of PR newswire for the world. But you could never do that on TikTok.
No,
you could never say, the Diao, now the South China Sea.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh, no. That would be that would be the PR Newswire for like whatever the fuck they're doing in the South China Sea.
Right. Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is like, I needed this today. I have been.
I'm sorry, just before that, can you put up a poll about like who prefers TikTok over Twitter over Facebook?
Oh yeah.
I'm curious as to I assume we have a more Twitter centric.
I bet we do.
Yeah.
But I bet we do. But like, I mean, I don't use, and we were saying this before, like I don't know. I will say this, that is probably different from you, because you were like, I'm not that really into TikTok. I will like, there is that thing that happens where all of a sudden you're like looking at a video and you're looking at one and you're looking at another, and then all of a sudden it's like 45 minutes of your life are gone. And that is, I don't have it on my phone like for that exact reason. Like I just like I don't really care that much. Unless I'm like something is like happening in my life and I really need distraction so that I don't like, I don't know, like I'm not like being anxious about something. I'll like go through it, but yeah, I don't know. Like,
yeah, no, I hear you. Although I will say that like my morning routine is I get up and, a good hour and a half will go by of me being on Twitter. But like, I mean, a lot of reading. I'll be a lot of clicking of links and then going back and forth. And whereas Twitter feels to me more like tasty protein, whereas TikTok just feels like pure sugar.
Yes. No, totally. That's a really good way of putting it. I also feel like this reminds me of the time that my mom like clipped out. This is classic mom, early internet mom behavior. She like clipped an article in the newspaper out that was about RSS feeds and then like cut it out and then got her secretary to scan it in and then like scanned me the thing
and then printed it out and then faxed it.
RSS feeds. This was like in 2016. So like it's not, she was like, have you heard of these things called RSS feeds? And I was like, oh dear Lord, like what is going on?
That is priceless about the fact that it got cut out and
attached to an email, like not a link. Like there were many layers in which it was very kind of, it was tragic. But like, yeah, I think that there would be some, like the TikTok version of that, if she ever discovered it, would be like taping something on VHS and then mailing it to me.
Can you set up another poll asking whether I should try to do TikTok videos?
Ooh.
See, my kids.
You did do the really good soup counter.
Yeah, I know. So that's the thing.
And the cancel culture.
But here's the thing: my kids, who are very savvy, they are sure I should not do it.
Oh, really?
It's like even for you, even for you, that's too far. Yeah, you're right. I guess that's right because they don't.
Like, this is kind of like if you ask your parents, like, should I quit my job and become an artist? They're going to be like, hell no. And if you say to your kids, should I get into TikTok and start making videos? They're going to be like, oh no, don't.
Dad, we want all my friends seeing you go, no. So, I think you're right about that they may not be the most reliable respondents. The more reliable respondents is the Greek chorus. And what do they say?
They say that you should overwhelmingly.
You should. But I'm curious, can I hear maybe some of the hell no's?
Yeah. Does anyone want to say no, don't do it, and come on and say why? On? Yeah, we'll see if see if Cash is here yet. Someone keep an eye out for Cash. She's gonna be a little bit late.
Wait, this isn't the show. The show wasn't whether I.
Oh yeah, no, the show. I mean, this can be the show. I mean, we used to this is like. I mean.
This was right. The beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Tim Scott says that he'll come on. Let's see what Tim thinks. Why he thinks that there's hell no. Oh, he can't. He's not live.
Pet Noodle. I trust Pet Noodle. She volunteered.
Okay. Pet Noodle. Lisa.
I trust Pet Noodle.
I know. I feel like
she's gonna give you the reasonable view.
Yes, I agree. Let's see here. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, how are you folks?
Good. So why do you think that Scott shouldn't do TikTok videos?
Well, I think that we would love it, but it just seems like it would take up so much of your time and that you probably have more like constructive things to do.
Oh, okay.
I think about
Lisa, have you ever met me?
No, I mean, I feel like I know you really well because you're always on my computer. But like I've been spending all this time over the past 3 days, like documenting this larva that's on our front porch, and it takes so much time to do things like that.
That is true.
Well,
and
you were just complaining about that.
I was actually just complaining
about my larva.
Yeah, I was.
not always about you, Lisa. God.
I'm such a pain in the ass. It's too bad.
No, but I hear you, because the thing is, Ben Wittes, really nice guy. You should meet him at some point. So I'm doing this hacking course with Ben and Lawfare, and Ben had this phenomenal idea that in addition to the syllabus, we would have a 1-minute video of what's in the class.
Like a trailer.
Yeah, like a trailer, exactly.
Right. But isn't it taking you like hours to get it exactly right? See, it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, can I show everyone my first one?
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Are you going to do it by holding it up to this is, by the way, I called Ben at some point because I was driving and listening to Scott, hold on.
That looks great.
Scott, are you
You need to make a movie of that.
Yes, it's just like
That looks great. Yay!
Cash is here. I'm gonna thank you for the noodle. I was just gonna say really quickly that that this is like, I called Ben at some point while I was driving and listening to the legality, and I was like, there's so much to love about like the jurisprudence podcast, but one of the things that I really love is that it's just so clear that Scott is just to do the intros and outros, Scott is just holding his phone up to the microphone.
That's exactly what I did.
It was pretty hilarious. I'm going to bring passion, and so we'll have to now the fun will really begin. We were having a miserable time over the last 15 minutes.
And now we get to talk about false positives on child sexual
abuse material. Hey, friend.
Hello.
Hi. It's so nice to have you back. Let me pull up your article, actually, so that I can
read it for the first time.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet, so that's like embarrassing. I'm not supposed to admit that. No, Scott, have you guys been on the show together? Have you guys met each other?
No, I've not had the pleasure. I'm Scott Shapiro. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Scott. Nice to meet you.
Kashmir and I, way back in the day, started. Do you know that the first hit that I still get for you is your TrueSlant page?
Really?
Cash? Yeah. On Google.
I know. You.
We were both. Cash was you were blogging for Above the Law, and then you went to TrueSlant and you were doing the not so private parts at TrueSlant, and I was doing Full Court Press, which was like a law blog while I was a law student, and then I just kind of stopped being a full-time journalist, but you obviously kept going and have been wildly successful at it. But you have an awesome news story up that we have talked about for a while, because you've been digging into this. I don't know, how long have you been reporting this out?
A few weeks now. Sorry, my daughter's peeking in here. I can't right now. I'm on an interview. Sorry.
So
let's back up and edit that out, please.
Yes. Scott's been spending too much time making for his online hacking class. But so let me just give the TLDR of the story, but then we're going to go into it in detail. So Kashmir wrote this story that is essentially about a person that had taken a picture of their toddler young son's penis because it had some type of rash on it or something, and they were sending it to the pediatrician, and it was on his Google Android or whatever, and somehow in the automatic photo backup, it got scanned as being child sexual abuse material, which might sound not surprising because it's a picture of a young kid's penis and but if you know how all of this works, it actually is quite surprising because child sexual abuse material is primarily identified through a thing called photo DNA, which is essentially like a hashing system that has there is a database that is held by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that basically has all known incidents that have been reported to police of child sexual abuse material, so that like when that type of stuff gets shared, because there is like, thankfully, hopefully, like not like that there is this universe of child sexual abuse material that is not constantly getting remade and shared. And so anyways, there's this one-to-one matching program through Photo DNA, but it's not actually like, this is one of the reasons that like you taking a photo of your kid in the bathtub, like, and sending it to their grandparents isn't going to get flagged as child sexual abuse material. And what Cash kind of found out is like, oh, there are a lot of false positives, because essentially these tech companies are running ML technology, machine learning technology, or automated technology to scan for new instances of CSAM. So that was kind of crazy, and no one had reported that, right? Like, I remember, like, you told me, and I was like, that seems crazy. That seems nuts.
Yeah, I was reaching out to a lot of experts, just asking, have you heard of this happening before? And I think for most people, this is the first, I think one of the first, maybe the first false positives on CSAM. And honestly, it was kind of surprising to me. I had not realized that Google had rolled out this tool in 2018. I mean, they basically trained a child sexual abuse material, a CSAM detector, which is, in a way, I mean, it's incredible. And you can see the appeal of such a tool to find kids who are being exploited or abused. But I was just surprised because Apple, ran into such a backlash last year when they were announcing that they wanted to do more CSAM scanning, and Google kind of was doing this thing that's pretty, when you think about it, pretty controversial. And I just had not heard, I missed a big debate about this, and maybe it's just because there's a lot more stuff going on in 2018.
You weren't the only one that missed it, though. Like, yeah. I mean, like, yeah.
I taught a class on server-side scanning, and there, as far as I could tell, there was no discussion of this. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but so the fear for photo DNA and but more general client-side scanning is the problem of what's called hash collision. Is that you could have different photos having the same hash, and it would, ping your phone. But I'm surprised that Google is using a very different technique, as Kate mentioned. What incentive did they have to be extra strict about CSAM? Yeah, proactive. Thank you for that. That's the right word, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Cash?
I mean, I think that there has been a lot of pressure on the tech companies to do something about this. It's kind of almost every debate about kind of surveillance and privacy always comes back to child abuse, child exploitation. And so, I think that they're reacting to that and trying to be as aggressive as possible, and, potentially finding kids that are being abused. But I mean, it's just, I saw somebody in the comments talk about part of the reason that Apple was so controversial is because it was on, the client side. But essentially that's kind of what's happening in the two cases I wrote about. They had Android phones that were automatically backing up to Google's photos. And so they weren't flagged because they sent the photos necessarily. They're flagged because they took the photos, and they just have auto backup on so that they don't lose their photos and their videos if they lose their phone. So in some ways, there's increasingly like no differentiation between what's on your phone and what's in a tech company's cloud, because so many of us are doing auto backups so that we don't lose, all of this priceless data, which these two fathers just lost because they got their medical photos got flagged.
So, but the one thing so after the flack that Apple got over the possibility of false positives, did that? If I were Google, I would have stepped. I mean, I'm not Google, but so I don't know how they think, but like I would have stepped back from being super aggressive about it. No.
Well, what I find so hard about this and really complicated for Google, I mean, uh, I think it's fair to say that Google's kind of adjudication process is not good here, that they really gave these fathers no real chance to provide the context for these photos. And it did not, didn't seem to take into consideration that the police investigated both of these fathers and came back and said no crime occurred. I talked to the San Francisco Police Department. They confirmed. I talked to the Houston Police Department. They described it as a misunderstanding, that Google isn't taking that into consideration. But the actual photos themselves, I understand why they flagged Mark's photos. He showed them to me. They're explicit photos of, a child's genitalia. If I saw that photo out of context, I would probably think, yeah, this is potentially CSAM. And if it was being sent in a different context, it would be. So it's not one of those. I write so many stories where the AI got it wrong. In this case, the AI got it right. There just was no chance to add that context to the human being, the human in the loop that's supposed to, solve this problem. That human isn't willing to do a correction here. And so I think that's the problem.
So we talked about this when I was we were talking about the story, but it's kind of worth rediscussing, which was just kind of like what you said just now. And I kind of pushed back on it. I remember because I was like, they did get it correct, but they didn't get it correct because yes, with all of the context, and even in the case, I think it was of Mark, who is the person in SF that had you initially did the story on, that even in that case, that there were other types of kind of maybe other kind of pictures that seemed like they might be indicative of something, but if you kind of took them in totality, they might be suspicious, but they still weren't. This person was just not a child pornographer. This was not being used for sexual abuse of material. And so it's it is really interesting what correctness is in this context, because a photo is it's kind of, it's a little bit why I kind of think the epistemological questions around mis and disinfo are so kind of reductionist and dumb, which is is Seinfeld real life? No, it's not real life, but it's a very true depiction of one type of real life. You could just get into all of these various types of layers. It's would that be child sexual abuse material? Yes, it walks like a child sexual abuse material, talks like it would be, but it's not, because the intentionality behind it is not there. But humans did scan this, right, Cash? Didn't they look at Mark's stuff?
Yeah. So what happens when Google flags something like this is they do send it to a human content moderator to review what the AI flagged, to confirm that it meets, the federal definition of CSAM. And then they lock that user's account and they review it for any other exploitative material, because most people that are apparently dealing this material, they usually don't have just one image. They're going to have a bunch of other images. And so they might find new images they've never seen before, et cetera. So they'll review the account. And so in this case, Google did say that there was, a human review process, and they found this other video that they considered problematic, and that it was, basically a naked woman with a child, and that this was on top of. But I don't know, when they're describing it to me, I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't necessarily sound problematic to me either. They're crunchy parents. They hang out nude with their kids. That to me doesn't seem that weird, but it did feel very uncomfortable to be having that conversation, that they're kind of digging this deep and looking at people's photos and just making judgments about how they're parenting. It is a slippery slope.
And as we kind of discussed, is the implications for finding, so Google is obligated, if they surface something like this, to report it to police.
Yes.
And so there's this very real world effect. I mean, listen, there's long-term private effect, which is that that Mark and the other person lost their ability to fully access their Google accounts, which impacted their lives in a bunch of different ways. But even kind of scarier is the fact that once you involve law enforcement, it's like, well, they could have had their kids taken away for a period of time. They could have there's like a ton of things that like you could just kind of see the police investigating this and deciding if they showed up and like Mark and his family were being crunchy and hanging out in the nude with their kids, like when they came to like do a wellness check or something. Like
what has absolutely happened, like back in the day when people used to take their photos to be developed, I remember a case more than a decade ago, a Walmart photo developer flagged people's, they had like bath photos that they were developing, and the Walmart photo developer person reported them to the police. And apparently they did have like their kids taken away. They ended up suing Walmart, suing the state. But it was, this is what happens kind of when you have a review process of people's otherwise private photos. I mean, there's good outcomes where you are there. I mean, I know I've written about cases where they have caught, active child molesters because they were finding this kind of imagery. I mean, I do know there are good outcomes, but there is a big risk here.
Well, I never thought of Walmart as being a big content moderator. But I mean, I guess that's really true. That like, I mean, they're not legally obligated to look through these photos. But it is, as you pointed out, like these problems, long precede, the internet. I mean, because people I remember, I mean, what's particularly strange is that the relationship that parents have to their children, their babies' bodies especially, is that like you're like in it so much that you don't actually see it as like, genitalia or something like that. I remember my wife and I, we had this picture of my daughter when she was like a month old in the bath, and we were going to send it out as like a Christmas
card.
No, it's a birth announcement. I remember showing it to my advisor and him looking at it and going like this, and I thought, well, you're a prude. And then he was a kind of a prude, but but then I thought, oh my God, actually this is human genitalia. You don't act, and it's of without their consent and stuff like that. And it just never occurred to me. And I'm sure it's the case with parents taking pictures of their children that, that they don't think of it that way. And so it's even more problematic than just invading people's privacy. It's kind of invading parent-child relationship.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I hate that there've been scholars that have written about this, right? Like the way that we have set up federal penalties around these kinds of images kind of inherently sexualizes children's bodies in a way that's just deeply uncomfortable. I think about this a lot, being a parent, having young children. They're playing with devices, they're taking photos, they're interested in their own bodies. And like, I don't want to body shame them, but I also am worried, what if they take an image like this when I'm not around? I mean, I just think that is a real risk. And obviously we see it happen with teens, right? Like teens are sexting and they're literally creating material that is illegal of their own bodies. I mean, it's just...
I never thought of that, right?
Oh, no. Like I do think about this stuff a lot because of content moderation, but this is like one of the things that I actually like, one of the early kind of, I would say when there was like non-consensual pornography that like people would send around or other types of things. And especially when like you would get this frequently with like teenagers sharing a video or an image or a topless photo or something like that someone sent, is that like one of the ways in which like the early on that they encouraged people to deal with this or to kind of seek repercussions was to charge this other child with the possession of child pornography and child sexual abuse material, because they had, I mean, because like even if the like say it's a boy and a girl, the guy is 14 years old and the girl is 13 years old, it's child sexual abuse material. The girl has created it. She shared it willingly, but like she's not old enough to consent or create that type of thing. And so they can charge him with that. I mean, it's the same idea of kind of using, it's like these weird, and like this became this, by the way, I should say this is like, I'm sure this is still used in certain scenarios, but it has like kind of gone a little bit by the wayside because it has become so prolific that this happens so often. And there was obviously ruining, like you were just like, it wasn't actually a great solution to anything. Like you were ruining like another kid's life for being an idiot and like being a terrible person by sharing this type of image, but also like permanently labeling them as sex offenders and things like that. And so it was just like, it was a very, yeah, I think that this is, I want to bring up really one thing before we start bringing in questioners though, Cash. Can you talk a little bit, because I think this is fascinating, but like, I love how when you report stories, you just have this knack of like finding yourself in strange situations, or not strange, but like weird coinky dinks. And this is one of those, which is, so just kind of tell us how this all started off with Mark, who is like this former, like who is in like the Bay Area, and how you found your second source on this.
Yeah, this is the secret of my investigative reporting is I'm very lucky and I get a lot of quinky dinks.
You also work really, really, really hard. Let's just be totally honest. It's not like all coinky dinks.
So,
Napoleon famously said that generals make their own coinkydinks. So.
Sorry.
So I'm interviewing Mark. I'm talking to him. I'm reporting on his story. And as I'm kind of like working on the piece, I'm trying to figure out, he couldn't find the screenshots on his phone of when Google first disabled his account. So I'm Googling, ironically, looking for, well, what is the kind of language you would get on your phone when something like this happens? And I stumble upon this post on Quora from somebody named Cassio, and he's talking about, I took photos for the pediatrician, my account got disabled. I don't know what to do. And my account got disabled on this day in February 2021. And it just read just like Mark's story. And so I just assumed that Mark had posted it as part of his, trying to get help when this first happened. And it had been posted last year. But I mentioned it to him and I said, oh, you have that one post about it. And he's like, I didn't write that post. And my eyes just like widened. I was like, did your wife write this post? It is so similar to your story.
It was similar in like, it was like down to like my son had a rash on his penis. They instructed us to like take, it was like very similar, and it was like the same day or the day after.
Almost the same day. It was the day after. And so I sent it to him. He just checked with his wife. He says, no, this is not us. And so then I had to go and find that father, and I get in touch with him, and he's in Texas. And, I had to kind of convince him to talk to me initially because when he first wrote that post, he hadn't yet been investigated by the police. That happened later. And I think once it's, at first it's like, it may be catastrophic. It may be so difficult. It's like having your digital house burned down to not be able to get your Google data. But it's a different level when the police show up at your door and are accusing you of abusing your child. So he was kind of reluctant to talk to me at first, but we were able to talk, and it was the exact same story that happened to him. And that made me realize, this isn't such an edge case. There's probably more of these people out there, and it's a scary thing to come forward about. And even as I was working on this story, I would just be talking to people about it. And I was shocked by the number of people who were kind of like, oh yeah, like I needed to take a photo like that of my son, after I got him circumcised. My pediatrician got his iPad out and showed us like had a whole bunch of photos of like kids' penises, saying this is what it might look like after it's circumcised. Just many people with stories of having to take photos of their kids' genitalia, mostly for medical reasons. And I was just shocked. I was, this happens a lot. And I have heard since the story went out from pediatricians, from pediatric surgeons who regularly, ask for these photos because they're so helpful after you do a surgery down there. There's like a bulge that can develop that's a problem. And so they'll ask parents to send a photo after surgery so they can know if there's a problem. Yeah, it's just, I talked to Google.
I will just say
pediatricians, but I just can't believe how often.
Well, what's really crazy is one, the pandemic, Mike Godwin points out in the chat that like in the pandemic, this is especially encouraged because people didn't want to come in. Two, I would say that like, by the way, surgical photos have been in some ways surgical or medical photos have been in some way the bane of content moderation for a very long time. One of the main and kind of easiest content moderation rules is like if you can see the outsides or the insides on the outside, like if you can see like blood and guts or like a broken bone visible, but like obviously like if there's a compound fracture, you're going to like, and so like there's all like, are you not going to, if you're a doctor on Facebook, like, and you have other doctors that you're friends with, like what if you see some really interesting presentation of something? Okay. Like, I mean, there's just a lot of kind of, I don't know. Like, I think that this is all it's all super interesting. But one of the things that really, and I think I'm still think this is weird, is that this happened on the same weekend with the exact same type of photos with two different people, both using Android phones. And it made me think that there was some type of fuck up in the Google classifier or the algorithm that kind of had like made this get flagged erroneously. And then Google like said, like, didn't even like, they're like, no, that's not what happened. And I thought that was so fucked up. Like, I was like, how, like, first of all, you kind of think that they'd take that out if they could, like, and they didn't. And so that was also something that I think that was really, have you had people contact you since the story came out to say that like similar things have happened to them? You always have this happen to you, by the way. It's not a coinkydink.
I encourage people to reach out to me if they've had similar things happen to them. I'll say that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What did you? I'm sorry. I missed what you said.
I encourage people to reach out to me if they have similar stories. I'm definitely getting a lot. I'm definitely getting stories.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if that was a coded way of saying.
That was a coded way, but way to ask the follow up.
It's the version of this is just a clarifying question.
Good journalism.
Can you repeat the evasive thing you just said? Well, that may I ask, without prying too much, around the same time as this, or it was spread out?
I haven't had any follow-ups, specifically in this.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Dr. Doom, you have a bunch of great questions. Do you want to ask your first one? I think that it was the one that's the most upvoted.
Sure. Presumably, the analysis happens at either upload or download, and your article is probably sensitized lots and lots of parents. So do you know if these pictures are going to be reanalyzed, and do you expect a higher rate of these problems? And also, what would you recommend to parents in terms of purging their archives?
Oh, one other question, Cash, to follow up that on Dr. Doom's. I don't know if it made it into the story. I haven't read it in a day or two. But what happened with NCMEC taking the photo and entering this photo into their database? Because it's related to Dr. Doom's question. But you had said that NCMEC had taken the photo, and they're like, oh, we put the photo into our database. And I'm like, fuck that. It's a false positive. This is never going to show up. Why would you hash this and put it into your database?
Yeah. So on a part of that question, I don't know if I can answer. I'm not sure, if Google scanning or how you particularly find these photos. I talked to a pediatrician who kind of focuses on child abuse, and she said, you should never take these photos of your kids, that you don't want to normalize taking photographs of your children's genitalia. And, I pushed back on that a bit because I said we are in, a telemedicine era. Sometimes a parent wants to track a condition. And she said, well, if you have to, make sure you're not uploading it to the cloud and that you delete it right after, because, you know, once you create an image like this, what if it does get out there? What if it does start getting, you know, exchanged by people, which ironically is what happened here. Like, you know, this dad's photos got passed around at Google, and now a lot of people looked at them.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that just sounds like a weird thing to say, that you normalize taking pictures of your kids' genitalia as if that's going to be the gateway drug to child sexual abuse material. That's just a very strange argument, frankly.
I have heard from parents who have gone to the pediatrician, like when pediatricians usually have to look around in that area, they talk a lot about it to kids, and they say, you know, a stranger should not normally do this. I'm doing this because we're worried about it.
I see. You don't want you, but the thing is, there's lots of things that we say as parents to our children, like, you know, like you know, it just, I mean, part of the relationship is, you know, that parents can do things to children, to their children, and you tell your children what other adults are not allowed to do to them. So that sounds like, to me, almost like a fanatic thing. Maybe I'm wrong. It just seems like somebody who works on the subject is a little bit too interested in that subject. Or
I was a little surprised to hear it, but it's part of why I put in the story, because it wasn't something I had kind of thought about before as a journalist or as a parent. But also what Kate is alluding to. So yes, so this process, part of the problem I think with this process all the way down is that there is no kind of feedback. Like the chain is Google finds something, it reports it to NCMEC, NCMEC reports it to the police investigate, but then it doesn't go back up the chain. And so NCMEC doesn't know if a parent, or, you know, if a person is prosecuted or not, or if it was a false positive. It's not going back to them. And so NCMEC, once it, and NCMEC is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're like the clearinghouse for this material. They're kind of act as the gatekeeper, so you don't have Google just directly, you know, finding problematic material in the user account and directly telling the police. They tell NCMEC, and then NCMEC tells the police. And so NCMEC, when they get a photo like this and they say, yes, this is CSAM, we're going to report it to the police, they put it into their hash database and it's now a known image. And they also included Mark's son, for example, in there. They said, you know, last year they identified 4,260 child victims, and Mark's son is counted as one, is in there. And so now these photos that were taken are known CSAM. And yeah, again, contextually, if someone else had them, they started getting passed around, then they would be. But in this case, the only other person who had them would be the doctor and Mark's wife. And Mark's wife has an iPhone. And so when I told them this, they just hadn't thought about this. She was like, oh my God, I need to delete these photos. If Apple ever started doing this thing where they're scanning people's phones for known CSAM,
then it's not going to be a contextual situation. It's going to be a literal known piece of pornography that she has like collected on her phone.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to go farther than you did, Cash, because this is a little bit my prerogative as like a scholar, is like that NCMEC is notorious, like as much as they do the some of work on some of the nastiest stuff that exists on the internet and are heroes kind of in that regard, they are, from a civil liberty perspective, have gotten a lot of pushback because they are, the numbers that you talk about of like, this is like a victim and they're counting Mark's son as a victim. Like, they have very few disclosures in like the amount of fault. They don't report how many false positives that have been flagged. They don't report how many pieces of pornography are even in their database. They don't report like how many they've added. They don't report how they do, like there's just no knowledge about how this giant kind of like database of materials collected or generated, how it could go wrong. And like, as we intend, like, you know, and so I just think that there's, you know, this is one of really, I would say like, you know, and the reason that they push back is like, I kind of, to Scott's point, like, I kind of like, you know, it's, they don't have the like, they really kind of fall on this, like, well, this is horrible. And so you don't want this stuff up here. So you just have to trust us that we're doing this and we know what but like what you just described is like any rational person like would not like. Also, can I just say, like, what if something ever happens to the NCMEC database or some type of thing in which there is some type of reverse engineering or anything that happens, and it's like now there is a threat that there is some way in which like Mark's son has been entered like a database of material that is like, you know, that could potentially put him at risk. And that's a little bit like far afield, but I do think that there's, I don't know. I just think that like there needs to be a lot more transparency with something like NCMEC when it's in charge of this type of thing, but also that like they can definitely have a little bit more transparency without kind of putting them at risk for trolls or like the bad actors that they're so afraid of.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, I'm empathetic to NCMEC. I'm empathetic to the people who work on this issue at Google. I mean, they see awful stuff, and there's been a lot of like work done in the technology industry to try to keep people from having to look at these photos, like coming up with AI that describes what's happening in the photo, so they don't have to actually look at the photo. But I mean, having this be part of your job, it's got to warp how you see people. Like I like to, you know, I don't assume this is something that's happening to kids, you know, but they have seen all these kids that this has happened to. So I think for somebody like Google, when they see images like this, I imagine the people that work on this specific issue have a hard time thinking, oh, actually those images are innocent. Because I think they've seen so many times when the images aren't innocent. So in terms of the humans that are making this decision, that has to be part of it, that they're looking at these things all the time. They're not going into it with the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Oh, Scott, I muted you because a train was going by.
Okay. If you think about the risks that Google faces, imagine the story you would tell if you know, they just let these child sexual abuse materials go. You know, you'd be like, Google doesn't care about this problem. So I also imagine that they thought that nobody was going to hunt down the false positives in the way that you have. But I think the incentives are definitely in terms of the false positives at a certain point.
Yeah, I'm very cognizant that for Google, this has got to feel like a 1-2 punch in a way, because, you know, my colleagues on the investigative desk did a hard, you know, look at this problem of there's just millions of images on the internet of kids being abused, or at least millions of images that are classified that way. And I think it's evident now that there's definitely false positives in there. But even knowing that, there's still just a lot of this happening. And so they did a story that was kind of saying, why aren't the technology companies doing more to stop this? And so to have that story come out in 2019, and then my story to come out saying, wow, you've really done it wrong here. I realize it's difficult. It's difficult for them. And this is just not an easy job. And that technology companies are being asked to kind of step in and play a law enforcement role. Like, you know, I think the story be sentinels, and they're going to make mistakes. I mean, you have one company that's just dealing with, I don't know how many users Google has. I mean, 1 billion users, I'm sure.
It's really hard to be a $1 trillion company who basically controls the world's information. So
it is.
There is, you know, you're going to be subject to these, you know, it's really hard to.
It's hard to be king.
Yeah, it's hard to be king. Exactly.
My friend Charlotte Wilner, who has worked in trust and safety for years and now runs the Trust and Safety Professionals Association, is fond of saying that trust and safety, the T and S, stands for trade-offs and sadness, because, which I think is like just a perfect, like, Charlotte's very clever, but this is also exactly correct. Like, it is trade-offs and sadness, and there's going to be times that like the bad stuff gets through. But to your point, like, I do think that CSAM material is the type of thing that we're going to keep ratcheting up the type of thing and caring less and less about the false positives. And if there isn't somebody out there, also, like, as I told you and we talked about, Cash, like, the real thing is, like, once the feedback does come down and you realize that this has happened, it just is not that crazy to build some type of loop back up so that you can try to, like, kind of, like, deal with it and rectify the situation. And so, yeah, I think that that's a really good point. Richard Wattenbarger.
Can you hear me? Oh, I can be heard. Okay. I guess one of the things that kind of puzzles me about this, about Google's no tolerance policy, is that I can appreciate that. For example, you have 100 million images, and you've trained your AI well, but if it's still letting, if it's making an error on 0.1% of those, that's still 100,000 cases. That's 100,000 false positives. And that's a lot. So I guess I'm puzzled from the internal management process side. Why don't they have a more robust process, or have a process in place that is going to handle these cases? Are they overconfident in the technology, or are they just not thinking about these things? What's going on? Or do you have any sense of that?
I mean, the very first the very first story I did at the New York Times was about Facebook users who, like, broke some kind of Facebook rule and got kicked off of Facebook and then couldn't get their accounts back and, like, went to all kinds of lengths to adjudicate it. I think these days, now that Facebook has the Quest 2, people will literally buy the $300 Quest 2 because with hardware, you get to talk to a customer support person. And so they'll buy it to try to get, like, their Instagram account back. Like, it is a problem. And I think in part it's a problem because Google, Facebook, Twitter, these companies are offering their services for free / for data and for your eyeballs to look at ads. And, there's that very old adage, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. And that plays a big role here. Like, you are the product, and there's not product support. I think it's an under-resourced part of these companies because you're not paying them, and how much you're worth to them in terms of, like, what your data is worth is very minuscule. It's in aggregate that their customers are worth a lot of money. And
there's nowhere else to go.
Right.
Right. The final thing, right, is that, right, you're a marginal benefit to them, but, like, to you, being on the platform is enormously important.
One of the things in my time with the Hertz story, and then also, like, doing all of this stuff on, like, I wrote a piece for The Atlantic on getting locked out of my Twitter account and, like, getting false flagged for that, and then, like, also getting false flagged for Facebook, and then having the connections to all of those platforms to get myself back in. There is this really, I think this is one of the things that I hate the most about these platforms, is that you're right, like, an average person has, like, no ability to kind of leverage those types of connections. And they're just one tiny product of the 3 billion people that Facebook is productizing. And I still to this day get probably a couple emails a week from people who have issues with Hertz, or are locked out of their Twitter accounts, or have issues with their Facebook account. I mean, some of them are really kind of sad stories. Like, they're like, my son is like a Texas football star in high school. We have, like, the way they do recruiting to get into college and get scholarships is to have, like, these reels and to have, like, an entire Instagram, like, presence, and to like collect all the clips. Like, they took down his account, and now we can't, like, basically market him to schools for scholarships. And it's kind of like, on the one hand, this person is, like, gonna be okay. But like it totally changes the trajectory of your life if at like 17 years old you're not getting a scholarship to college because your Instagram account was shut down. And I also you, Cash, can't write stories about each of those people, and I can't like be trying to break those people out of Instagram jail. And so it's just like it is like a crazy problem, and only like a couple of the paradigmatic individual cases ever make it to kind of create the type of pressure on these companies and get picked up by media. So.
And I think it's hard because they are, and both Mark and Cassio, the other dad, just described Google to me as kind of like a public utility that they took for granted. And they're like, the government needs to do something about this. Like, Google shouldn't be able to just delete all my data. And I do think that is a little unfortunate that I get it. Okay, Google doesn't want them as users. They sent naked photos of kids. Google doesn't care about the context. It doesn't want that kind of
exposure,
content or exposure, on its platform. But they come back with a police report that says they didn't commit a crime. Let them do Google takeout. Like, let them walk away with their data, and then never let them be Google users again. But just to take away that data can just, it's contacts, it's email. I think my next story is going to be about how do I get all my data off the cloud? Because if this happened to me, it would be devastating. Research I've done for my book. it's just so much that's just in my email, and I just assume I'm always going to have access to it. And if it went away overnight, I would just, I don't know what I would do.
You don't even just assume. I still do have like these, it's actually because we've been going through all of these hard drives that we have and things like that. And I have like my hard drives that I removed from all of my old crappy laptops that like put in external drives that are from like high school. And I used to this was before you could type in a keyword search and like find the document you were looking for. I meticulously file things and like these like crazy files. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that at all. Like I count on the fact that I'm going to be able to search and do like a real language search and be able to find what I'm like looking for. My hard drive is a mess because of this. Like there's half of this stuff is in downloads, half of it's on the desktop, half of it's in the iCloud desktop, like whatever the fuck. It's terrible. But it's like a really great point. I hope you write that story because I feel like it would be a service.
Next time coming.
Yeah, but also
don't scoop me.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to scoop you. Don't worry. But we have to leave it there. This was really fun. I don't know that.
Hey, thanks for being a source for the story.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I didn't like do that much. It was just super interesting. I don't know. It was a super interesting story. I'm really glad you wrote it. I'm just like, I do think that like, as Scott so wisely said, it's really hard being like a $3 trillion company that controls all the world's information. But
yeah. Let's think about it from their side for once. We've just been dumping on them and everything. Thank you so much for coming on. This was CSAM is, it's a terrible phenomenon, but it's also an absolutely fascinating set of issues that run through lots of different debates, and so this was a particularly clear example of things going really wrong. Thank you so much for coming on and for writing the story.
Thanks for talking about it with me.
We will be back. I'm going to drop the link one more time into Cash's story in case you missed it. And we will be back. On tomorrow. Ben and Genevieve will be doing the show, and then it'll be me and Ben on Friday, and we have an awesome guest who just wrote an amazing book, law professor who's a contracts professor, and that will be many hours and many minutes from now. And until then, Scott.
Oh, we can't have fun anymore, but we have complete control over our data. Nobody can take that away from us.
Yeah.